The stagecoach rattled into Fort Worth, Texas on a scorching afternoon in August of 1878, and Nora Prescott knew with absolute certainty that her old life was about to catch up with her in ways she could never have imagined. She pressed her gloved hand against the dusty window, watching the rough timber buildings and canvas tents that made up this frontier town, her heart hammering against her ribs with equal parts fear and desperate hope. The bruise on her cheekbone had faded to a sickly yellow, but the memory of how she'd gotten it still made her flinch. She'd left St. Louis 3 weeks ago with nothing but a carpet bag, $40 sewn into her petticoat, and the clothes on her back. The man she'd been running from, a wealthy merchant named Harold Winters, who believed he owned her simply because he'd paid for her company for 6 months, had connections that stretched across the Mississippi. But Texas was wild country, lawless in many ways, and she hoped to disappear into its vastness like a stone dropped into a river. The stage lurched to a stop outside the Wells Fargo office, and Nora gathered her meager belongings. Her traveling companions, a stern-faced preacher and his wife, hadn't spoken to her once during the journey. Women traveling alone always drew suspicion, and Nora knew what assumptions people made. Let them assume. She'd survived worse than judgmental stares. Fort Worth was rougher than she'd anticipated. The main street was a churned mess of mud and horse manure despite the summer heat. Saloons seemed to outnumber respectable establishments 3-1, and the sound of a piano playing badly drifted from somewhere nearby, mixing with shouts and the occasional gunshot that made her jump. Cowboys lounged against porch posts, watching her with interest that made her pull her shawl tighter despite the oppressive heat. She needed work, and she needed it quickly. $40 wouldn't last long, and she had no intention of returning to the only profession available to desperate women in towns like this. She'd done what she had to do to survive in St. Louis after her father died and left her with nothing but debts, but she'd promised herself those days were behind her. The hotel was called the Cattleman's Rest, and it looked marginally cleaner than the other establishments on the street. The clerk, a thin man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers, looked her up and down with the same calculating expression she'd seen 1,000 times. "I need a room for the week," she said, keeping her voice steady, "and I'm looking for respectable work. Do you know of any families needing help? I can cook, clean, and I have good references." The last part was a lie, but a necessary one. The clerk scratched his chin. "Ain't many families in Fort Worth looking for help. Most women here work at the saloons or the sporting houses, if you take my meaning." "I don't." Nora placed $2 on the counter. "The room, please." He slid a key across the worn wood. "Room 6, top of the stairs. There's a widow woman, Mrs. Callahan, runs a boarding house on the edge of town. She might have work. Can't promise nothing, though." It was better than nothing. Nora took the key and climbed the narrow staircase, her legs aching from days of travel. The room was small and spare, containing only a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single chair. But it was hers, at least for a week, and it had a lock on the door. That was worth more than all the luxury in the world. She was washing her face in the tepid water from the pitcher when she heard shouting from the street below. Curiosity drew her to the window, where she could see a crowd gathering outside one of the saloons. 2 men were facing off in the street, hands hovering near their guns. Her stomach clenched. She'd heard about gunfights, but she'd never witnessed one. Before the situation could escalate, a third man stepped between them. Even from her second-story window, Nora could see he was different from the others. He stood nearly a head taller than most men, with shoulders broad enough to block out the sun. He wore buckskin clothing instead of the denim and cotton favored by the cowboys, and his dark hair fell past his shoulders. His face was weathered and hard, like it had been carved from the same stone as the mountains. His voice carried up to her window, deep and commanding. "Take your quarrel somewhere else. I'm not in the mood to step over bodies today." One of the would-be fighters, a young cowboy with more bravado than sense, made the mistake of turning his aggression toward the newcomer. "Who the hell are you to tell us what to do? You ain't the law." "No," the big man agreed. "I'm worse." He didn't raise his voice, but something in his tone made both men take a step back. "Now move along before I lose my patience." They moved. The crowd dispersed, disappointed at being denied their entertainment. But the big man remained in the street for a moment, and Nora found herself unable to look away. He moved like someone completely comfortable in his own skin, unhurried and deliberate. Then, as if sensing her gaze, he looked up directly at her window. Their eyes met across the distance, and Nora felt something shift in her chest. His eyes were pale, she thought, maybe blue or gray, and they held an intensity that made her breath catch. For a long moment, neither of them looked away. Then he touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that might have been mocking or might have been respectful, and walked away toward the edge of town. Nora stepped back from the window, her heart racing for reasons she couldn't quite name. She told herself it was just the stress of the journey, the fear of being found, the uncertainty of her future. But she knew that wasn't entirely true. The next morning, she set out to find Mrs. Callahan's boarding house. The clerk had given her rough directions, and she walked quickly through the early morning streets, trying to avoid attention. Fort Worth was already awake and rowdy despite the hour. Freight wagons rumbled past, and the air smelled of dust, horses, and the stockyards that gave the town its livelihood. Mrs. Callahan's place turned out to be a large, rambling structure that had probably been a ranch house before the town grew up around it. A vegetable garden stretched behind it, and chickens scratched in the yard. Nora felt a surge of hope. This looked like a place where honest work might be found. The woman who answered her knock was small and round, with gray hair pulled into a severe bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "If you're looking for a room, I'm full up," she said before Nora could speak. "I'm looking for work, madam. The hotel clerk said you might need help." Mrs. Callahan's expression softened slightly. "You got experience keeping house?" "Yes, madam. I can cook, clean, do laundry, and I'm good with mending." All true, though most of that experience had been in establishments she'd rather not mention. "You're a pretty thing," Mrs. Callahan said bluntly. "I run a respectable house. I don't want trouble with my boarders." Nora met her eyes steadily. "I'm not looking for that kind of attention, madam. I just need honest work." Something in Nora's directness must have satisfied the older woman. "I can offer you $3 a week plus room and board. You'll work 6 days, Sundays off for church." "I got 8 boarders, mostly men working the cattle drives or the railroad. You'll cook, clean, do the washing, and help me with the mending. The work's hard and the hours are long. You interested?" $3 a week wasn't much, but with room and board included, she could save her precious $40. "When can I start?" "Right now, if you're able. I got a room out back that's yours if you want it. Small, but it's private and it locks from the inside." Mrs. Callahan's eyes held understanding that made Nora wonder what the woman had survived in her own life. "I'll need to collect my things from the hotel." "Do that, then come back. We serve supper at 6 and you'll help me prepare it." Nora walked back to the Cattleman's Rest feeling lighter than she had in months. Honest work, a safe place to sleep, and a chance to build a new life. It was more than she dared hope for when she'd climbed onto that stagecoach in St. Louis. She was packing her few belongings when someone knocked on her door. Nora froze. Nobody knew she was here. Nobody should be knocking. "Miss Prescott?" The voice was male, cultured, and unfamiliar. "I'd like to speak with you if I may." Her mouth went dry. "Who are you?" "My name is Thomas Mitchell. I'm an attorney. I have a business proposition that might interest you." An attorney. That could mean 1,000 things, none of them good. But curiosity and a lifetime of learning to face problems head-on made her open the door, keeping the chain latched. The man on the other side was middle-aged, well-dressed in a suit that looked out of place in Fort Worth. He held a leather portfolio and wore an expression that was meant to be reassuring but struck her as oily. "What do you want? May I come in? This is a delicate matter. We can talk here." She kept the chain latched. Mitchell sighed. "Very well. I represent a client in St. Louis, Mr. Harold Winters. He's asked me to locate you and extend an offer. He's willing to forgive your abrupt departure and welcome you back with generous terms. He's prepared to offer you your own house, a monthly allowance of $50, and a wardrobe befitting a woman of quality. All he asks is your exclusive companionship and discretion." Nora's stomach turned to ice. He'd found her. Less than 24 hours in Fort Worth, and Harold had already tracked her down. She should have known he wouldn't let her go so easily. Men like him never did. "Tell Mr. Winters I'm not interested," she said, keeping her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. Mitchell's pleasant expression didn't change. "He anticipated you might need convincing. He asked me to remind you that he has friends in many places, including Texas. He could make things very difficult for you here, or he could make things very comfortable. The choice is yours, but he expects an answer within 3 days. I just gave you one. I'm not interested. Think carefully, Miss Prescott. Fort Worth is a rough town. A woman alone with your particular history might find life here quite challenging. Mr. Winters is offering you security, comfort, and protection. That's more than most women in your position could hope for." Nora wanted to slam the door in his face, but years of survival had taught her not to make enemies unnecessarily. "I'll think about it," she lied. "Where can I reach you with my answer?" "I'm staying at this hotel, room 12. 3 days, Miss Prescott. Mr. Winters is not a patient man, as I'm sure you remember." The implied threat in those words made her skin crawl. She closed the door and leaned against it, her mind racing. Harold had found her too quickly, which meant he'd been tracking her from the moment she left St. Louis. He wouldn't accept her refusal, not really. Men like him believed they could buy anything, including people. She needed help, but she didn't know anyone in Fort Worth. The law wouldn't protect her from a wealthy man's persistence. Mrs. Callahan seemed kind, but what could an elderly widow do against Harold's money and connections? The image of the big man in buckskin flashed through her mind. He'd stopped a fight with nothing but his presence and his voice. But she didn't even know his name, and asking a stranger for help was its own kind of risk. Still, she couldn't just wait for Harold's deadline. She gathered her belongings and returned to Mrs. Callahan's boarding house, her eyes constantly scanning the street for any sign of Mitchell or men who might be working for him. Mrs. Callahan showed her to the small room behind the kitchen. It was plain but clean, with a window overlooking the vegetable garden and a sturdy lock on the door. Nora unpacked her few possessions and changed into an older dress more suitable for work, then joined Mrs. Callahan in the kitchen. The afternoon passed in a blur of activity. Nora helped prepare a massive supper of roast beef, potatoes, beans, and biscuits. Mrs. Callahan kept up a steady stream of chatter about the borders, the town, and the challenges of running a respectable establishment in a place like Fort Worth. Nora tried to focus on the work, but her mind kept circling back to Harold and his 3-day deadline. At 6 o'clock, the boarders began filing in for supper. They were a mixed group, railroad workers, cattle buyers, a surveyor, and a few men whose occupations Nora couldn't guess. They nodded politely to her but directed their attention to their plates. Clearly, Mrs. Callahan ran a tight ship. Nora was carrying a platter of biscuits to the table when the front door opened, and the big man from yesterday walked in. She nearly dropped the platter. He was even more imposing up close. He had to duck slightly to clear the door frame, and his presence seemed to fill the entire dining room. His face was all hard planes and angles, weathered by sun and wind, with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow. But it was his eyes that caught her again, pale gray and sharp as broken glass. "Evening, Cole," Mrs. Callahan said warmly. "I was wondering when you'd show up." "Got your usual seat saved." Cole. So that was his name. He moved to the far end of the table, choosing a chair that put his back to the wall and gave him a clear view of both the front door and the kitchen. A man who'd learned to be careful, Nora thought. His eyes found her across the room, and she felt that same strange jolt she'd experienced yesterday. Recognition flickered in his gaze, and something else she couldn't quite read. "This is Miss Prescott," Mrs. Callahan announced. "She's helping me around the house now. I expect all you boys to treat her with respect or answer to me." A chorus of acknowledgement went around the table. Cole said nothing, but he inclined his head slightly in Nora's direction. She returned the gesture and fled back to the kitchen, her cheeks burning. "Don't mind Cole, Mrs. Callahan said, watching her with knowing eyes. "He's rough around the edges, but he's a good man. Lives up in the mountains most of the year, only comes to town for supplies. Got a cabin about 20 miles north of here." He's a mountain man. Nora had heard of them, of course. Men who lived solitary lives in the wilderness, trapping and hunting, coming to civilization only when necessary. That's right. His family name is York. Been coming here for 3 years now, ever since I opened this place. Always pays in advance, never causes trouble, and once he stopped a drunk cowboy from breaking my good china. I trust him more than most men I know. Nora filed that information away, though she wasn't sure why it mattered. She had bigger problems than trying to figure out a mysterious mountain man, no matter how intense his gaze or how broad his shoulders. After supper, the boarders dispersed to the sitting room or their own quarters. Nora helped Mrs. Callahan clean up, a process that took well over an hour with the mountain of dishes they'd generated. By the time they finished, full darkness had fallen, and Nora's feet ached. She was heading toward her room when she heard a low voice behind her. "You're the woman from the hotel window." She turned to find Cole standing in the hallway, his tall frame blocking most of the lamplight. Up close, she could see details she'd missed before. The calluses on his hands, the careful mending on his buckskin shirt, the way he held himself with the stillness of someone accustomed to hunting and being hunted. "Yes," she said, lifting her chin. "And you're the man who stopped the fight." Cole York. He didn't offer his hand, which was just as well. She wasn't sure she wanted to touch him, afraid of what that contact might do to her already rattled nerves. "Nora Prescott." "I know. Mrs. Callahan introduced you." He studied her face with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable but somehow wasn't. "You're running from something." It wasn't a question. Nora considered denying it, but something about his directness invited honesty. "Someone. A man who thinks he owns me." Cole's expression didn't change, but she saw something flicker in his eyes. "Does he?" "No." The word came out fierce. "I belonged to myself then, and I belong to myself now." "Good." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "Men who try to own people usually don't give up easy." "I know." She hesitated, then decided to trust her instinct. "An attorney came to see me today, made me an offer on behalf of the man I'm running from, gave me 3 days to accept. And if you don't accept," he implied there would be consequences. Cole's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Legal consequences. I don't think he's concerned with legality. He's rich, connected, and he's used to getting what he wants. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. I was hoping distance would be enough, but I was wrong. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly exhausted. I won't go back to him. I'd rather die. Something shifted in Cole's expression, a softening around his eyes that surprised her. It won't come to that. Where's this attorney staying? Here at Mrs. Callahan's. Room 12. Cole nodded slowly. I'll handle it. I didn't ask you to fight my battles. No, you didn't, but I'm offering anyway. He took a step closer and she caught his scent. Pine, wood smoke, and something wild she couldn't name. I've seen men like that before. They only understand one kind of language, and it's not the polite kind. I don't want you to get in trouble on my account. I won't. There was absolute certainty in his voice. Get some rest, Nora Prescott. Things will look different in the morning. He walked away before she could respond, disappearing up the stairs with surprising quiet for such a large man. Nora stood in the hallway for a long moment, feeling like something fundamental had just shifted in her life, though she couldn't quite put her finger on what. She slept poorly that night, waking at every small sound. When she finally dragged herself out of bed at dawn, she felt hollow and shaky. But there was work to do, and work had always been her salvation. Mrs. Callahan was already in the kitchen, stoking the fire in the big cast iron stove. She glanced at Nora's face and frowned. Rough night. I'll manage. Cole asked me about you this morning, wanted to know your whole story. Nora's hand stilled on the coffee grinder. What did you tell him? The truth, as much as I know it. That you're a woman looking for a fresh start and someone from your past is trying to drag you back. Was I wrong? No. Nora resumed grinding the coffee beans, the rhythmic sound soothing. Did he say why he wanted to know? Cole doesn't explain himself much, but I've learned to trust his instincts about people. Mrs. Callahan began laying bacon in a massive skillet. He's been through things himself, lost his whole family to a Comanche raid when he was 17. Spent the next few years hunting the men who did it. When he was done, he disappeared into the mountains and didn't come back to civilization for nearly 5 years. Some say he went a little mad up there alone, but when he finally came down, he was different, calmer. Like he'd made peace with his demons. The story painted a picture that made Nora's heart ache. She understood loss and transformation, the way trauma could reshape a person entirely. He seems very certain of himself. That's what happens when you survive the worst and come out the other side. You stop being afraid of much. Mrs. Callahan cracked eggs into a bowl with practiced efficiency. I'm just saying, if Cole's taken an interest in your situation, you could do worse than accept his help. He's not the type to ask for anything in return. Nora wanted to believe that. But in her experience, everyone wanted something eventually. Breakfast preparation kept her busy for the next 2 hours. The boarders ate in shifts, the early risers clearing out before the late sleepers appeared. Cole came down just before 7, and Nora made herself meet his eyes as she poured his coffee. Thank you, he said, and she wasn't entirely sure if he meant for the coffee or for something else. You're welcome, she replied, equally ambiguous. He left after breakfast, and Nora tried not to feel disappointed. She spent the morning doing laundry in the big copper tub out back, her arms aching from scrubbing and wringing. It was honest work, though, and there was satisfaction in seeing the clean sheets flapping on the line in the hot wind. She was hanging the last sheet when she heard raised voices from inside the house. One of them was Thomas Mitchell's cultured tones. The other was Mrs. Callahan, and she sounded angry. Nora dropped the basket and ran inside, her heart pounding. Mitchell stood in the front hallway, his face red with indignation. Mrs. Callahan blocked his path to the kitchen, arms crossed and expression thunderous. "I told you, she's working and doesn't want to be disturbed," Mrs. Callahan said firmly. "This is a private matter between Miss Prescott and my client," Mitchell insisted. "I must speak with her." "And I must insist that you leave my property," Mrs. Callahan shot back. "You've upset my help and disrupted my household. You're not welcome here." Mitchell's eyes found Nora standing in the kitchen doorway. "Miss Prescott, please be reasonable. Mr. Winters has increased his offer. He's now prepared to provide a monthly allowance of $75 and a house of your choosing." "This is an extraordinarily generous offer for a woman of your background." The contempt in that last phrase made Nora's blood boil. "My answer hasn't changed. Please leave. You have 2 more days to reconsider. Mr. Winters expects you to be sensible about this." Mitchell's smile was cold. "He's reminded me to tell you that he knows about everything you did in St. Louis. Every man you entertained, every debt your father left behind. Information like that could make life very difficult for you here, should it become public knowledge. Blackmail, of course." Nora had known men like Harold didn't take rejection well, but she'd hoped distance would make her too much trouble to pursue. She'd been naive. "Get out," Mrs. Callahan said, her voice like steel, "before I fetch the sheriff." "The sheriff is a reasonable man who understands the law," Mitchell said smoothly. "Miss Prescott isn't wanted for any crime, but her reputation could certainly be called into question. I'm sure Mr. Winters would prefer to avoid that unpleasantness if she simply accepts his very reasonable offer." He tipped his hat and walked out, leaving a poisonous silence behind him. Mrs. Callahan turned to Nora, her expression troubled but not condemning. "Is it true, what he said about St. Louis?" There was no point in lying. Nora lifted her chin and met the older woman's eyes. "My father died 3 years ago and left me with nothing but gambling debts. The men he owed came looking for payment, and I had no way to satisfy them. So I made arrangements. I've been with other men," she said, the words tasting like ash. "For money, for survival, for reasons that seemed necessary at the time. Harold Winters was the last. He paid off my father's debts in exchange for 6 months of my exclusive company. When the 6 months ended, he decided the arrangement should continue indefinitely. I disagreed and left." "That's the truth." Mrs. Callahan was quiet for a long moment. Then she surprised Nora by reaching out and squeezing her hand. "We all do what we must to survive. I won't judge you for that, and I won't turn you out, but this Mitchell man worries me. If he starts spreading tales about you, it could cause trouble." "I know." Nora's throat was tight. "I'll pack my things and leave. I won't bring scandal to your house." "You'll do no such thing." Mrs. Callahan's voice was firm. "You're staying right here, and we're going to figure this out together." Nora nearly wept at the unexpected kindness. Before she could respond, the front door opened again, and Cole walked in carrying a bundle wrapped in brown paper. He took one look at their faces and set the package down. "What happened?" Mrs. Callahan explained about Mitchell's visit and his threats. Cole's expression grew progressively darker as she talked, until his eyes looked like storm clouds gathering over the mountains. When Mrs. Callahan finished, Cole turned to Nora. "This man, Harold Winters. Tell me about him." Nora swallowed hard. "He's a merchant in St. Louis, made his fortune in cotton and textiles during the war. He's in his 50s, never married, but he's had a succession of mistresses over the years. He's well connected politically and socially. When he wants something, he usually gets it." "Usually," Cole repeated, "but not this time. You don't understand. He has money, power, connections. What can anyone do against that?" Cole's smile was grim. "I can make him understand that pursuing you further will cost him more than he's willing to pay. Some problems can't be solved with money or lawyers. You're talking about violence." Nora shook her head. "I won't have you hurt someone on my account, no matter how much he deserves it. I'm talking about making a point. There's a difference." Cole picked up his package again. "This is for you, by the way. Thought you might need a warmer coat for when winter comes. Mrs. Callahan mentioned you didn't have much in the way of belongings." He handed her the bundle, and when Nora unwrapped it, she found a beautiful wool coat lined with soft fur. It was far too expensive a gift, especially from someone she barely knew. "I can't accept this," she said, even as her fingers stroked the soft material. "It's not charity. Call it payment for the good meals I've been getting." Cole's eyes were gentle. "You'll need it come November. Mountains get cold." Mountains. As if he assumed she'd still be here in November, still be safe and free and working at Mrs. Callahan's. The presumption should have annoyed her, but instead it filled her with a strange warmth. "Thank you," she said quietly. Cole nodded, then turned to Mrs. Callahan. "I need to speak with that attorney. Which room?" 12. "But Cole, be careful. If he reports you to the sheriff's a friend. We served together in the army years back. Don't worry about me." He paused at the base of the stairs. "Nora, I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" She barely knew him. He was practically a stranger, rough and dangerous and completely outside her experience. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw something that made her breath catch. Absolute certainty that he would keep her safe, no matter the cost. "Yes," she heard herself say. "I trust you." Something shifted in his expression, a softening that transformed his harsh features into something almost tender. Then he turned and climbed the stairs, his footsteps heavy on the wood. Mrs. Callahan and Nora waited in tense silence. Minutes passed, feeling like hours. Then they heard a door open upstairs, followed by the low rumble of Cole's voice. Mitchell's response was too quiet to make out words, but his tone was indignant. Then Cole's voice came again, still quiet but carrying a quality that made the hair on Nora's arms stand up. She couldn't hear what he said, but she heard Mitchell's frightened yelp clearly enough. More quiet conversation, then footsteps on the stairs. Mitchell appeared first, his face pale and his hands shaking. He didn't look at Nora or Mrs. Callahan as he hurried toward the front door. Cole followed at a leisurely pace, looking entirely unconcerned. "Mr. Mitchell has decided to return to St. Louis," Cole announced. "He'll be catching the next stage out. He also wanted me to convey that Mr. Winters has reconsidered his interest in pursuing Miss Prescott. Apparently, the cost has become prohibitive." Mitchell shot Cole a look of pure hatred but said nothing. He grabbed his bag from behind the desk and practically ran out the door. Mrs. Callahan raised her eyebrows. "What exactly did you say to him?" "Just explained the situation in terms he could understand." Cole's expression was bland. "Sometimes city men forget that the law works differently out here. I reminded him that accidents happen in rough country, and wealthy men from St. Louis have been known to disappear in the Texas wilderness. I also mentioned that I have friends among the Comanche, and they have long memories for men who mistreat women." "You threatened him," Nora said, not sure whether to be horrified or grateful. "I explained consequences," Cole corrected. "There's a difference. He's free to do whatever he wants, but now he understands what might happen if he continues bothering you. My guess is he'll tell Winters that you've found protection here, and Winters will decide you're more trouble than you're worth. And if he doesn't," Nora's voice was small. Cole looked at her with those storm-gray eyes. "Then I'll handle that too. You're under my protection now, Nora Prescott. Nobody's going to hurt you or force you into anything, not while I'm breathing." The declaration should have felt possessive, controlling. Instead, it felt like the first truly safe moment Nora had experienced in years. She blinked back sudden tears. Why are you doing this? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." Cole was quiet for a moment, his gaze dropping to the floor. When he looked up again, his expression was unguarded in a way she suspected was rare for him. "Maybe I see something in you that reminds me of myself," he said slowly. "Someone who's been through hell and came out the other side still fighting. Someone who deserves a chance to build something new without the past dragging them down." He paused, then added more softly, "Or maybe I just don't like bullies, and I'm partial to brave women who know their own worth." Mrs. Callahan made a small, knowing sound in the back of her throat. Nora felt her cheeks heat, but she didn't look away from Cole's intense gaze. "Thank you," she said again, putting everything she couldn't quite articulate into those 2 words. Cole nodded. "I'll stick around town for a few more days just to make sure Mitchell gets on that stage and stays gone. After that, I need to head back to my cabin. But I'll check in regular, and if you need me, Mrs. Callahan knows how to get word to me." He left after that, and Nora returned to her work in a daze. The rest of the day passed in a blur of cooking and cleaning, but her mind kept circling back to Cole's words and the way he'd looked at her. Like she mattered. Like she was worth protecting. That night, after the supper dishes were washed and put away, Mrs. Callahan made them both tea and sat Nora down at the kitchen table. "That man's half in love with you already," she said without preamble. "I've known Cole for 3 years, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." Nora's hands shook slightly around her teacup. "That's impossible. We've barely spoken." "Some things don't require much talking. He recognized something in you, same as you recognized something in him." Mrs. Callahan sipped her tea thoughtfully. "Question is, what are you going to do about it?" "Nothing. I'm not looking for a man, Mrs. Callahan. I just escaped from one who tried to own me. The last thing I need is to fall into another man's orbit. Cole's not that kind of man. He doesn't own anything but his cabin and his horse. He lives alone by choice, and he's independent as they come. But even independent men need someone sometimes, and Cole's been alone a long time. I don't know anything about him. He's a stranger. Then get to know him. He'll be around for a few more days." Mrs. Callahan's smile was gentle. "I'm not saying you have to marry the man, Nora. I'm just saying don't close yourself off to possibility. You've been hurt, but that doesn't mean you'll always be hurt. Sometimes good things happen to people who deserve them." Nora wanted to believe that, but believing in good things felt dangerous, like tempting fate. The next morning, Cole appeared for breakfast as usual. Nora served him his coffee and eggs, hyper-aware of his presence in a way that made her clumsy. She nearly dropped a plate, caught herself, and felt her cheeks flame when she noticed him watching her with what might have been amusement. After the morning rush cleared out, Cole found her in the garden where she was picking vegetables for the midday meal. "Mitchell got on the eastbound stage this morning," he reported. "Watched him leave myself. He looked real eager to get out of Texas." Nora straightened, pushing hair out of her eyes. "Then it's really over, this part of it anyway. Can't promise Winters won't try something else eventually, but my guess is he'll cut his losses. Men like that have plenty of other opportunities. He'll find someone else to bother." The thought should have made her happy, but instead Nora felt a strange melancholy. "So you'll be leaving soon? Back to your cabin? Day after tomorrow, probably?" Cole knelt and began helping her pick tomatoes, his large hands surprisingly gentle with the fragile fruit. "It's a hard ride, takes most of a day. I don't like being away from the place too long. Got traps to check and winter preparations to make." "Mrs. Callahan told me you live alone up there." "That's right. Just me and the mountain. Sometimes I go weeks without seeing another person." "Doesn't it get lonely?" Cole was quiet for a moment, considering. "Sometimes, but loneliness is better than being around people who make you feel empty. I learned that the hard way." Nora understood that better than he probably realized. I felt more alone in St. Louis, surrounded by people, than I ever did when I was truly by myself. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she felt like he was seeing straight through to her bones. "Yeah," he said softly, "I expect you did." They worked in companionable silence for a while, filling the basket with tomatoes, beans, and squash. The morning sun was warm on Nora's back, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something close to peaceful. "Will you come back?" she asked before she could stop herself. "To town, I mean, to Mrs. Callahan's. I always do, eventually, usually every few weeks for supplies." He paused, then added, "Might come more often, though, if I had a reason to." The implication hung in the air between them. Nora's heart beat faster, but she forced herself to be honest. "Cole, I need you to understand something. I've been with other men. For money, because I had to survive. I'm not pure or innocent or any of the things a good woman is supposed to be." "Good," Cole said, surprising her. "I'm not looking for pure or innocent. I'm looking for strong and honest and brave enough to do what needs doing. You're all those things, Nora Prescott. But you'll only be with me now," she said, the words coming out before she fully understood what she was saying. It was half question, half statement, testing something she wasn't sure she was ready to name. Cole's eyes locked with hers, intense and unwavering. "If you'll have me, then yes. Only you. I'm not a man who shares, and I don't play games. When I commit to something, I commit completely." He reached out and gently touched her cheek, the gesture achingly tender. "But you don't have to decide anything right now. I'm a patient man, and you've been through enough. I can wait until you're ready." Nora's breath caught. She should step back, maintain distance, protect herself. But instead, she found herself leaning into his touch, starved for gentleness after so much hardness. "I don't know what I'm ready for," she admitted. "I don't know how to do this. Everything I've known about men and relationships has been transactional. I don't know how to just be with someone." "Then we'll figure it out together." Cole's thumb brushed her cheekbone. "No pressure, no expectations. Just two people getting to know each other and seeing where it goes." It sounded too good to be true, but looking into his eyes, Nora wanted to believe it was possible. "Okay," she whispered. "We can try." Cole's smile transformed his whole face, making him look younger and lighter. "Okay," he echoed. They spent the rest of that day and the next finding excuses to be near each other. Cole helped her hang laundry, chop wood, and repair a broken gate. They talked while they worked, sharing bits and pieces of their lives. Nora learned that Cole had been a soldier before he became a mountain man, that he'd read more books than most educated men she'd met, and that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. She told him about her childhood with a father who loved gambling more than he loved his daughter, about the desperate years after his death, about the relief and shame of accepting Harold's offer. Cole listened without judgment, his attention making her feel heard in a way she'd never experienced before. On his last evening in town, Cole invited her to walk with him after supper. Mrs. Callahan shooed them out with a knowing smile, and they strolled through Fort Worth as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold. "I'll be back in 2 weeks," Cole said as they walked along the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open prairie. "That's a promise. And I'll bring you something. You don't need to bring me anything. I want to." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Nora, I know this is fast. I know you need time to heal and figure out who you are without someone trying to control you, but I want you to know my intentions are serious. I'm not playing around or looking for a temporary arrangement." Nora's pulse raced. "What are you looking for? A partner? Someone to share my life with if she's willing? I know my life isn't easy. It's isolated and hard, especially in winter." But it's free and it's honest, and I can offer you safety and respect and whatever else you need. That's a lot to offer someone you barely know. I know enough." His hand came up to cup her face again, and this time Nora let herself truly lean into the touch. "I know you're brave and strong and kind. I know you've survived things that would have broken most people. I know when I look at you, I feel something I haven't felt in 10 years. That's enough for me." "What do you feel?" Nora whispered. Cole's eyes were infinitely gentle. "Like maybe I don't have to be alone anymore. Like maybe there's someone in this world who could understand me and I could understand in return. Like maybe I've been waiting for you without even knowing it." Nora's vision blurred with tears. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I'm scared of getting hurt again. I'm scared of disappointing you. I'm scared of wanting something and having it taken away. I know, I'm scared too." The admission seemed to cost him something, "but I think you're worth being scared for." Then he kissed her, soft and careful, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Nora didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned in, her hands coming up to grip his shirt as she kissed him back with all the longing and hope she'd been trying to suppress. It wasn't like the kisses she'd experienced before, mechanical or demanding. This kiss was a question and a promise, tender and patient. It tasted like possibility. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cole rested his forehead against hers. 2 weeks, he said again. "Then I'll be back." "I'll be here," Nora promised. He left the next morning before dawn. Nora stood in the doorway of Mrs. Callahan's boarding house and watched him ride north on a sturdy paint horse, his supplies packed behind his saddle. He turned once to look back at her, raising his hand in farewell, and then he was gone. The next 2 weeks were the longest of Nora's life. She threw herself into work, helping Mrs. Callahan with everything from cooking to mending to scrubbing floors. She was saving her wages religiously, tucking away every penny. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she wanted to be prepared for anything. Mrs. Callahan watched her with knowing eyes but said nothing about Cole's absence. The other boarders came and went, and life at the boarding house settled into a comfortable rhythm. Fort Worth continued its rough existence around them, all dust and noise and occasional violence, but Nora felt insulated from it here. On the 13th day after Cole left, a telegram arrived at the boarding house. Mrs. Callahan brought it to Nora with a troubled expression. "It's from St. Louis," she said. Nora's hands shook as she opened it. The message was brief. "H. Winters deceased, stroke, estate in probate. You are mentioned in will. Attorney Johnson requests your presence. Travel expenses provided." She read it 3 times before the words made sense. Harold was dead. The man who'd controlled her life for 6 months, who'd tried to force her back into servitude, was gone. And apparently he'd left her something in his will. "Is it bad news?" Mrs. Callahan asked gently. "I don't know. The man I was running from is dead. His attorney wants me to come to St. Louis for the reading of his will." "Are you going to go?" Nora thought about it. The old Nora, the scared woman who'd fled St. Louis in the night, would have ignored the telegram and hoped the problem went away. But she was different now. She'd found work, found safety, found the beginnings of something that might be love. She was stronger than she'd been. "I should go," she said slowly. "If Harold left me something, it might be enough to secure my future. And I need to face that city again, prove to myself that I'm not running anymore." "When would you leave?" "Tomorrow, I suppose. The telegram says travel expenses are provided." Nora looked at Mrs. Callahan anxiously. "Will you hold my position here? I'll come back as soon as I can." "Of course, dear. This is your home now." Mrs. Callahan hugged her warmly. "Though I expect Cole won't be pleased to come back and find you gone. He'll be back tomorrow. I can leave him a letter explaining everything." That night, Nora wrote to Cole by lamplight, trying to explain the situation without sounding like she was running away. She told him about the telegram, about her decision to face her past one more time, about her promise to return. She ended the letter with words that felt both terrifying and right. "I'm coming back to you. Wait for me." She left the letter with Mrs. Callahan and caught the morning stage to catch the train east, the journey back to St. Louis took 6 days, and every mile felt like traveling backward through her own life. When the train finally pulled into the station, Nora's stomach was in knots. St. Louis looked exactly the same: busy, prosperous, indifferent. Nora hired a cab to take her to the address on the telegram, a law office in the business district. Attorney Johnson turned out to be a younger man than she'd expected, with kind eyes and a professional manner. "Miss Prescott, thank you for coming," he said, gesturing her to a seat. "I know this must be difficult for you, given your history with Mr. Winters." "What did he leave me?" Nora asked bluntly. Johnson opened a folder on his desk. Mr. Winters was a complex man. In the weeks before his death, he apparently experienced a change of heart about several matters. He left detailed instructions in a codicil to his will, added just 2 weeks before his stroke. He looked at Nora directly. "He left you $10,000, Miss Prescott, along with a letter." Nora's ears were ringing. $10,000. It was a fortune, enough to buy a house, start a business, secure her future completely. It was also deeply unsettling. "Why?" she whispered. "The letter might explain." Johnson handed her a sealed envelope. "He also wanted me to convey his apologies for his treatment of you. He acknowledged that he'd tried to control you inappropriately and that you had every right to leave." Nora opened the letter with shaking hands. Harold's handwriting sprawled across the page. "Nora, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I want you to know that sending Mitchell after you was a mistake born of pride and possessiveness. You were right to leave, and I was wrong to try to force you back. The money is not payment or compensation. Consider it an apology and a chance to build the life you deserve. You were always stronger than I gave you credit for. Use this money to be free. Harold." Tears streamed down Nora's face as she read. It wasn't redemption or forgiveness exactly, but it was acknowledgement. It was closure. "There are papers to sign," Johnson said gently. "But the money is yours. No conditions attached. Mr. Winters was very clear about that." Nora signed the papers in a daze. Johnson arranged for the money to be transferred to a bank in Fort Worth, and within 2 days, everything was settled. She found herself standing on the train platform with a bank draft in her bag and a strange sense of lightness in her chest. The past was truly over now. She was free, and she had the means to build whatever future she wanted. The journey back to Fort Worth felt different from the first time. Nora watched the landscape change from cultivated farmland to wild prairie with growing excitement rather than fear. She was going home, she realized. To Mrs. Callahan's boarding house, to the town she'd started to know, to Cole. Would he have returned while she was gone? Would he have gotten her letter? 100 anxieties plagued her during the long journey, but underneath them all was a steady certainty. She was making the right choice. The stage pulled into Fort Worth on a cool October afternoon, 3 weeks after she'd left. Nora gathered her bag and stepped down, breathing in the familiar smell of dust and cattle and possibility. A figure detached itself from the shade of the Wells Fargo office, tall and broad-shouldered and heart-stoppingly familiar. Cole. He crossed the distance between them in long strides, his eyes searching her face as if memorizing every detail. "You came back," he said, and there was wonder in his voice. "I promised I would." Nora's voice shook. "Did you get my letter?" "Got it." Didn't make the waiting any easier. He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle. How was St. Louis final? She smiled up at him. And profitable. Harold died and left me money in his will. $10,000, Cole. It's enough to do anything I want. Something shifted in his expression, a wariness she hadn't seen before. That's a lot of money. Changes things. How? You don't need to work at a boarding house anymore. You don't need protection from a rough mountain man. You could buy a house in town, set yourself up proper, live a comfortable life. Nora heard what he wasn't saying. You don't need me anymore. She stepped closer, looking up into his storm-gray eyes. What if comfortable isn't what I want? What if I want something else? What do you want? His voice was rough. I want to see your cabin in the mountains. I want to know what it's like to live somewhere beautiful and wild. I want to learn how to be with someone who sees me as a partner instead of a possession. She took a deep breath. I want to be with you, Cole. Only you. His hand came up to cup her face, and she saw everything she felt reflected in his eyes. Are you sure? My life is hard, Nora. Isolated and rough, especially in winter. There won't be other women to talk to or shops to visit or any of the things you're used to. I'm sure. She covered his hand with hers. I don't want easy anymore, Cole. I want real. I want honest. I want to wake up every morning knowing I chose my life instead of having it chosen for me. Can you give me that? Yes. The word came out fierce. I can give you that and more. I'll give you everything I have, everything I am if you'll have me. Then take me home, Nora said. Take me to your mountain. Cole kissed her there in the middle of Fort Worth in broad daylight where anyone could see, and Nora kissed him back, not caring who watched or what they thought. She'd spent too many years hiding and being ashamed. She was done with that now. They spent one more night at Mrs. Callahan's, making arrangements. Nora gave the older woman $100 as thanks for everything she'd done over Mrs. Callahan's protests. She bought supplies and practical clothes for mountain living, spending her money freely now that she had it. And she wrote to Attorney Johnson in St. Louis, giving him instructions for investing most of her inheritance safely, so she'd always have something to fall back on if she needed it. Mrs. Callahan cried when they said goodbye, hugging Nora tightly. You come visit, she ordered. I want to hear how you're getting on. I will, Nora promised, and thank you for everything. You thank me by being happy, Mrs. Callahan said firmly. That's all the thanks I need. The ride to Cole's cabin took most of a day, just as he'd said. They rode north through changing landscape, the flat prairie giving way to rolling hills and then to genuine mountains. The air grew cooler and cleaner, scented with pine and cedar. Nora had never seen country so beautiful. Cole's cabin sat in a sheltered valley, surrounded by tall pines and backed by a granite cliff. A clear stream ran nearby, and the view stretched for miles. The cabin itself was solidly built from logs, with a stone chimney and real glass windows that surprised her. I built it myself, Cole said, dismounting and helping her down. Took me 2 years working between trapping seasons. It's not fancy, but it's weatherproof and warm. Inside, the cabin was sparse but comfortable. One large room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room. A ladder led to a sleeping loft, and Nora could see a real bed up there, piled with furs and quilts. Shelves lined one wall, filled with books, and a large stone fireplace dominated another. It was clean and organized and felt like a real home. It's perfect, Nora said honestly. Cole, it's absolutely perfect. He looked relieved. I worried you might find it too rough. After sleeping in cribs in brothels and tiny servants' rooms, this feels like a palace. She turned to him, suddenly serious. I meant what I said in town. I want to build a life here with you. But I need you to understand something. I'm going to be a partner, not a kept woman. I'll work, I'll contribute, I'll pull my weight. Whatever money I have is ours to use for improving this place or securing our future. And in return, I need you to promise that I'm free. That this is my choice always and I can leave if I need to." Cole crossed the space between them and took both her hands in his. "You're free, Nora. You'll always be free. And yes, you're my partner. I wouldn't want it any other way. As for your money, that's yours. I don't need it or want it. But if you want to use it to make this place more comfortable, I won't argue." "I want to add a proper kitchen," Nora said immediately. "And maybe a root cellar for winter storage, and windows in the loft so we can see the stars at night." And Cole laughed and pulled her close. "Whatever you want. We'll build it together." That night, in the loft beneath quilts and furs, Cole made love to Nora with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. It was nothing like the transactions she'd experienced before, mechanical and empty. This was connection, communication without words, two people learning each other's bodies and hearts simultaneously. Afterward, lying in his arms, Nora felt something settle in her chest. Peace. Rightness. Home. "I love you," she said into the darkness, testing the words. Cole's arms tightened around her. "I love you too. Have since that first day I saw you at the window, though I didn't have words for it then. What did you see in me? Someone fighting, someone strong, someone worth knowing." He kissed the top of her head. "What did you see in me?" Nora thought about it. Safety, certainty. A man who knew who he was and didn't apologize for it, someone I could trust. "You can," Cole said softly, "always." They spent the autumn building their life together. Cole taught Nora how to hunt and trap, how to read the weather and the tracks of animals. Nora used her money to hire men from Fort Worth to help them add a proper kitchen wing to the cabin, complete with a cast iron stove and a good pump for water. They built a root cellar and a smokehouse, preparing for winter. Cole was a patient teacher, never condescending, always encouraging. Nora proved to be an apt student, learning quickly and contributing more every day. She discovered that she loved the physical work, the way her body grew strong and capable. She loved the silence of the mountains, broken only by wind and birdsong. She loved waking up next to Cole and falling asleep in his arms. In November, Cole took her to a small church in a town 30 miles away, and they were married by a circuit preacher. Mrs. Callahan came for the occasion, along with a few of Cole's friends from his Army days. It was a simple ceremony, but when Nora said her vows, she meant every word with her whole heart. Winter came, harsh and beautiful. Snow piled high around the cabin, and some days they couldn't go outside at all. But the cabin was warm, their supplies were plentiful, and they had each other. Cole taught Nora to read his books aloud by firelight, and she taught him songs her mother had sung when she was a child, melodies she'd thought she'd forgotten. On the coldest nights, wrapped in furs and quilts, Cole would trace the scars on Nora's heart with gentle fingers and patient words, helping her understand that she was more than her past, that she deserved love and happiness and peace. And Nora would hold him through nightmares about the family he'd lost, reminding him that he wasn't alone anymore, that he had someone to come home to, that he was loved. They talked about everything during that long winter. Nora shared stories of her childhood, sorting through the good memories and the painful ones. Cole told her about his years in the Army, about the Comanche raid that had changed everything, about the darkness he'd found in the mountains and the light he'd eventually discovered. "I thought I'd spend my whole life alone," he admitted one night, "thought I was too broken for anything else." "You're not broken," Nora said firmly. "You're healed. There's a difference. So are you." He kissed her gently. "We healed each other, I think." Spring came eventually, bringing green growth and warm winds. Nora discovered she was pregnant in April, and Cole's joy was so profound it brought tears to her eyes. He became even more protective than before, constantly worried about her welfare, though Nora assured him repeatedly that pregnant women had been doing physical work since the beginning of time. "Still," Cole said stubbornly, "you're carrying something precious. I'm allowed to worry." Their son was born in early December, during the first snowstorm of winter. Mrs. Callahan had come to stay with them a month before, and she served as midwife while Cole paced outside, nearly wearing a hole in the porch. When he finally heard his son's first cry, he burst through the door with wild eyes and wouldn't calm down until Nora showed him that both she and the baby were fine. They named him Samuel, after Cole's father. He had Cole's gray eyes and Nora's dark hair, and from the beginning he was alert and curious about everything. "He's going to be trouble," Mrs. Callahan predicted fondly. "Smart and stubborn, just like his parents." "I can live with that," Cole said, cradling his son with surprising gentleness for such large hands. Over the following years, they built an even fuller life. Cole continued his trapping, but he also started breeding horses, using part of Nora's money to buy good stock. The horses thrived in the mountain valley, and soon they had a small but profitable operation. Nora started a garden that expanded every year, and she learned to preserve food so well that they never wanted for anything, even in the deepest winter. 2 years after Samuel, they had a daughter named Rose, who had her father's disposition, calm and steady. Then, 3 years after that, another son they called James, who was all mischief and laughter from the moment he could crawl. Mrs. Callahan visited regularly, bringing news from Fort Worth and the wider world. The town was growing, becoming more civilized with each passing year. The wild days were fading, but Cole and Nora's mountain valley remained timeless, a pocket of peace carved out of the wilderness. On warm summer evenings, Nora would sit on the porch Cole had built, watching their children play in the meadow while Cole worked with the horses. Sometimes she thought about her past, about the scared woman who'd fled St. Louis with nothing but hope. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone she'd been a lifetime ago. "What are you thinking about?" Cole asked one evening, settling beside her on the porch swing he'd made for their 5th anniversary. "How far we've come," Nora said. "How different my life is from what I thought it would be." "Better or worse?" He was teasing, but there was genuine curiosity underneath. "Better," Nora said without hesitation. "So much better. I never knew I could be this happy, Cole. I never knew life could feel like this." "Like what?" "Like coming home every single day. Like being exactly where I'm supposed to be." She leaned against his shoulder, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. "Thank you for seeing me that day in Fort Worth. Thank you for giving me a chance." Cole's arm came around her, solid and warm. "Thank you for taking it. Thank you for trusting me when you had every reason not to trust anyone." They sat in comfortable silence as the children's laughter echoed across the valley, and the first stars began to appear. Nora thought about everything they'd survived, everything they'd built, everything they'd become together. She'd been with other men in the past, done things she wasn't proud of, survived in ways that had left scars on her soul. But Cole had been right all those years ago in Fort Worth. That was the past. This was the present, and it was more beautiful than anything she'd dared to dream. She belonged to herself first, always. But she'd chosen to share her life with Cole, to build something real and lasting and true. And in choosing him, in being chosen by him, she'd found not just love but freedom. Their children grew strong and healthy, learning the ways of the mountains from their father and the strength of spirit from their mother. Samuel proved to be a natural horseman, while Rose had her mother's practical intelligence and her father's steady courage. James was the wild one, always exploring, always testing boundaries, and his parents learned patience they hadn't known they possessed. As the years passed, Their story became something of a legend in Fort Worth. People talked about the mountain man who'd taken in a woman running from her past, and how they'd built a life together that was the envy of many more conventional marriages. Young women facing hard choices would sometimes ask Mrs. Callahan about Nora, wondering if it was possible to escape bad situations and find happiness. "Possible," Mrs. Callahan would say. "It's more than possible, but it takes courage, and you have to be willing to fight for yourself first. Nobody can save you but you. But once you save yourself, sometimes you find someone worth sharing your life with." Cole and Nora made the trip to Fort Worth twice a year, bringing their children to experience civilization and trade their horses for supplies and goods. The town continued to change, becoming less wild with each visit. Electric lights appeared on the streets in the late 1880s, and the railroad expanded, bringing more people and more industry. But Cole and Nora's Valley remained apart from all that, a sanctuary they'd created together. They added to the cabin over the years, building separate rooms for the children and a library for Cole's ever-growing collection of books. Nora used her remaining money wisely, investing in land around their valley to ensure they'd always have privacy and space. On their 10th anniversary, Cole surprised her with a piano, somehow hauling it up the mountain with the help of half a dozen men and 3 wagons. Nora cried when she saw it, remembering the piano music she'd heard that first day in Fort Worth, when her life had been so uncertain and frightening. "You said you used to play as a child," Cole said, looking pleased with himself. "Thought maybe you'd like to again." She had, and the music that filled their cabin became another layer of home, another piece of the life they'd built. She taught all 3 children to play, and summer evenings often featured impromptu concerts that brought joy to everyone. When Samuel turned 16, he announced he wanted to join the army, like his father had. Cole's face went carefully blank, and Nora knew he was remembering his own years as a soldier, the violence and loss he'd experienced. But he also understood that their son needed to make his own choices, forge his own path. "We'll support whatever you decide," Cole told Samuel. "But think hard about it. The army changes you, not always for the better." Samuel thought about it for a year, working the horses and learning everything his father could teach him about survival and strength and making hard choices. In the end, he decided to stay in the valley to help build the horse breeding operation into something bigger. Cole didn't say anything, but Nora saw the relief in his eyes. Rose proved to be the scholar of the family, devouring every book in Cole's library and constantly begging for more. When she was 14, a teacher passing through Fort Worth mentioned a women's college in California that was accepting students from all backgrounds. Rose came home with stars in her eyes and a brochure clutched in her hands. "I want to go," she told her parents. "I want to study and learn and see what's beyond the mountains." It hurt to imagine their daughter so far away, but Nora remembered her own desperation for a different life, her own need to escape and find freedom. How could she deny Rose the same chance to choose her own path? "Then you'll go," Nora said firmly, overriding Cole's instinctive protest. "We'll use the money I inherited to pay for it. That's exactly the kind of thing it should be used for." Cole argued at first, worried about his daughter in a world he didn't understand. But Nora reminded him that Rose had grown up strong and smart and capable, that they'd raised her to think for herself and make good choices. Eventually, he agreed, though watching their daughter leave for California 3 years later was one of the hardest things either of them had ever done. Rose wrote long letters about her studies, her new friends, the incredible things she was learning. She graduated 4 years later with honors and became a teacher herself, eventually opening a school in San Francisco for girls who might not otherwise have educational opportunities. Nora read Rose's letters with fierce pride, knowing her daughter was changing lives just as Mrs. Callahan had changed hers years ago. James, true to his nature, became a wanderer. He worked the cattle drives for a few years, then tried his hand at prospecting in Colorado, then worked as a scout for the railroad. He wrote less frequently than Rose, but his occasional letters were filled with adventures and stories that made Nora both laugh and worry in equal measure. "He's like you were," Nora told Cole one evening after reading James's latest letter, which described a confrontation with claim jumpers in Nevada. "Wild and independent and absolutely fearless." "He's like both of us," Cole corrected. "Strong enough to face whatever comes. We raised him right." As they moved into their later years, Cole's hair went silver and Nora's developed threads of gray. They moved a little slower, their bodies bearing the marks of lives lived fully and physically. But their love never dimmed. If anything, it deepened, growing richer with each shared year. They celebrated their 25th anniversary surrounded by friends from Fort Worth, their grown children, and even a few of their grandchildren. Samuel had married a woman from town and had 3 children of his own, all of whom loved visiting the mountain and learning from their grandfather. Rose came back from California with her husband, a professor, and their twin daughters. Even James showed up, weathered and scarred but grinning with tales of his latest adventure. Mrs. Callahan, now well into her 70s, made the trip one last time. She pulled Nora aside during the celebration and hugged her tightly. "You did it," she said simply. "You built something beautiful." "We both did," Nora replied. "You gave me the chance to start over. I'll never forget that." "That's what women do for each other," Mrs. Callahan said. "We give each other chances. Now you pass it on when you can." Nora took that advice to heart. As her reputation grew in the region, she began helping other women who found themselves in desperate situations. Sometimes it was money, sometimes it was advice, sometimes it was just a safe place to stay while they figured out their next step. Cole supported her completely, and their cabin became known as a place where women could find help without judgment. Over the years, they helped dozens of women escape bad situations, find work, start new lives. Some moved on quickly, while others stayed in the area and became friends. Each one reminded Nora of her younger self, scared and desperate but fundamentally strong. And each one she helped felt like honoring the chance she'd been given. As Nora approached her 50th birthday, she found herself reflecting on the incredible journey her life had taken. From the desperate young woman fleeing St. Louis to the secure, confident woman she'd become, the transformation still sometimes amazed her. She'd learned that strength came in many forms, that love could heal old wounds, and that the past didn't have to define the future. Cole, now in his mid-50s, had slowed down a bit but remained strong and capable. They spent more time simply enjoying each other's company, taking long walks through the valley they'd made their home, talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes they discussed serious matters like what would happen to their land and their horses after they were gone. Other times they simply reminisced about the early days of their relationship, laughing at how uncertain and awkward they'd been. "Did you ever imagine we'd end up here?" Nora asked him one summer evening, sitting on their porch as they'd done countless times before. "Honestly, no." Cole took her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. "I thought I'd die alone in these mountains. Figured that was what I deserved after everything I'd done, everyone I'd lost. And now I think maybe I was just waiting. For the right person, the right moment, the right reason to start living again instead of just surviving." He looked at her with eyes that still held the same intensity they'd had when they first met. "You gave me that, Nora. You gave me a reason to come down from the mountain." "You gave me a mountain to call home," Nora replied softly. "You gave me safety when I needed it most, and then you gave me so much more. Partnership, respect, love, everything I never knew I could have." "No regrets?" Cole asked. "Not a single one." Nora squeezed his hand. "Well, maybe one. I regret all those years before I met you, all the time I wasted being afraid and small. But even those years taught me things I needed to know. They made me who I am." "Then I can't regret them either," Cole said, "because I love who you are." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over their valley, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Nora thought about the scared woman who'd stepped off the stagecoach in Fort Worth all those years ago. And she wished she could tell that woman that everything would turn out better than she could possibly imagine. That taking the risk, trusting the mountain man with the intense eyes, would lead to a life beyond her wildest dreams. As full darkness fell and the stars began to emerge, Cole stood and offered Nora his hand. "Come on, let's go to bed. I want to fall asleep next to my wife." Nora took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. 25 years of marriage, and the simple act of going to bed together still felt precious. They walked inside, banking the fire and locking the doors, moving through their nighttime routine with the ease of long practice. In their bedroom, the one they'd shared for over 2 decades, Nora changed into her nightgown while Cole pulled off his boots. The room was filled with memories, the quilt misses. Callahan had made them as a wedding present, the cradle Cole had carved for Samuel, and that each of their children had used in turn, the photographs of their growing family on the dresser. They climbed into bed and Cole pulled Nora close against his chest, his arms wrapped around her in a protective embrace that still made her feel cherished and safe. "I love you," Nora whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Cole replied. "Always have, always will. You're mine, Nora York, and I'm yours. Only you forever." Nora smiled against his chest. "Only you," she echoed. "Forever." She'd been with other men before Cole, had done things she'd rather forget in her struggle to survive. But Cole had been right all those years ago when he'd said she'd only be with him from then on. Not because he demanded it or controlled her, but because she chose it freely, every single day. She'd chosen him, and he'd chosen her, and together they'd built something that would outlast them both. Their children would carry on their legacy, and their grandchildren would hear stories about the mountain man and the woman from St. Louis who'd found each other in Fort Worth and created a love story for the ages. As Nora drifted off to sleep, safe in Cole's arms, she felt nothing but gratitude. Gratitude for the courage that had brought her to Texas, for Mrs. Callahan's kindness, for Cole's steady presence, for the life they'd built together in these beautiful mountains. She'd started her journey with nothing but fear and hope. She'd end it with everything that mattered: love, family, home, and the absolute certainty that she'd lived her life on her own terms. And that, Nora thought as sleep finally claimed her, was more than enough. It was everything.